The Bible says that if any work was to be done on that day, they were to be put to death. In fact, that even happened in the Bible when a man was caught picking up sticks on the Sabbath. He was stoned to death. So the Sabbath day carries a heavy penalty, and it just shows us that God is very concerned about this day. He jealously guards this day as his own, and it's extremely important to him. So it should also be important to us if we are interested in pleasing God because of the love that he has for us. Let's look at Leviticus chapter 23. This is a very interesting chapter, telling us many things about the annual Sabbaths and also the weekly Sabbath. So let's start here in Leviticus 23, verse 3. Here we find the Bible says, 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest. Unholy convocation, ye shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. Now notice that word Sabbath is 7676. It's Shabbat. And the 7th day is the Shabbat. It's a Shabbat of rest. And that word rest is Shabbaton. So there is a distinct difference between those two words, Shabbat and Shabbaton. And it says, on the Shabbat day ye shall do no work therein. No manner of work at all was allowed on the Shabbat day. Okay, let's go on. Now in verses 24 and 25, we find that the word Sabbath is used again, but the Sabbath here is a different Hebrew word. Leviticus 23 verses 24 and 25 says, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, in the 1st day of the month, shall ye have a Sabbath. Now that's Shabbaton, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, unholy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein, but ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. So here we find one of those annual Sabbaths, and that is on the 1st day of the 7th month, and it's called a Shabbaton. It's not a Shabbat, but a Shabbaton. And you'll notice also that the prohibition is no servile work shall be done. It doesn't say no manner of work, it just says no servile work. And servile work I understand to be service work. If you're going to install carpet for somebody, or you're going to build a house for somebody and you're getting paid for that, that would be service work, and that would be prohibited on the 1st day of the 7th month. Now let's continue in Leviticus 23 verse 7, and here we're told that Leviticus, in the 1st day of unleavened bread, that is a day that no servile work was allowed also, and that is the 1st day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It falls on the 15th day of the 1st month. And that the Bible says clearly no servile work was allowed on that day. But we'll notice in Exodus chapter 12 that there were certain things that were allowed that were not normally allowed on the Sabbath. Exodus chapter 12, verse 16, the Bible says, No manner of work shall be done in them. This is talking about the 1st day of unleavened bread, which is the 15th day of the 1st month. It says, No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat. That only may be done of you. So here we find that food preparation is allowed on the Shabbaton days. That's what the 15th day of the 1st month is one of those annual Sabbaths or annual Shabbaton days where no servile work was allowed, but food preparation was permitted. Now let's read Exodus chapter 16, verse 23. The Bible says here, This is that which the Lord hath said, Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath, the holy Shabbat, unto the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that you will seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. So here the Israelites were taught that they should do their food preparation on the preparation day, the day before the Sabbath, so that on the Sabbath they wouldn't be preparing their food. So food preparation, we find, when we compare these 2 days, we find that food preparation was not allowed on the Sabbath, on the weekly Shabbat, but it was allowed on the Shabbaton days. And the Shabbaton days only servile work was prohibited, and on the Shabbat days no manner of work whatsoever was allowed. Okay, let's continue. We'll read in Exodus chapter 12, verses 3 through 6. And here the Bible says, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. So here the Bible tells us that on the 14th day of the month, the Passover was to be killed in the evening. And the Bible tells us in Deuteronomy what that means. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 6, it says, "Thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at even at the going down of the sun." So this is when the Passover was to be killed, on the 14th day at even, at the going down of the sun. Now, if you understand anything about the biblical way of reckoning a day, the nighttime always preceded the daytime. It's not like today we split days at midnight. That's not the way it was in the Bible. The days they stopped and began at the going down of the sun. That's when a new day began and the old day was finished. And the Bible says here that on the 14th day of the month, at evening, at the going down of the sun, is when the Passover is to be killed. And now look at Deuteronomy 16, verse 4. It says here, "And there shall be no leavened bread seen with thee in all thy coast 7 days, neither shall there anything of the flesh which thou sacrificest the first day at even." Now that's the 15th day of the month, and it says it's none of that shall remain all night until the morning. So here, the killing of the Passover was at the evening, at the going down of the sun, so close to the 15th that it could be called the 15th at evening or the 14th at evening. So it was between those 2 days when the Passover is to be killed. Now in Exodus chapter 12, verses 7 through 10, it tells you what happened next. It says, "And they shall take of the blood, and they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. That which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire." So we find here that the Passover was to be killed at evening, and then after that it was to be roast with fire, and then they were to eat it that night, and if any of it was left over until the morning, they had to burn it with fire. Now notice what the Bible says about the Sabbath in Exodus 35, verse 3. The Bible says here, "Ye shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day." That word Sabbath is Shabbat. So upon the Shabbat you shall kindle no fire, but on the 15th day of the first month, on the Shabbaton day there, you were allowed and even commanded to roast a lamb with fire, and then if anything was left over, you were to burn the carcass with fire on the Shabbaton day. Okay, let's continue here. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 39, we'll notice another thing it says here. It says, "And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual." So here the Bible says that they baked unleavened cakes on the 15th day of the first month. Now notice this comparison of these days so far that we've seen. The Bible says that food preparation is not allowed on the Shabbat days, the Sabbath, but it is allowed on the Shabbaton days. Baking unleavened cakes is not allowed on the Shabbat days, on the Sabbath, but it is allowed on the Shabbaton days. Roasting a lamb with fire is not allowed on the Sabbath, but it is allowed on the Shabbaton days. Burning a carcass with fire, not allowed on the Sabbath. You're not allowed to even kindle a fire on the Sabbath, but on the Shabbaton days, it was allowed. Okay, now let's turn